there, I'm Jennifer from my-colorado-kitchen.com, where I bring from scratch recipes straight from my Colorado kitchen to yours. Today we are going to be making a sourdough starter. I've gotten a lot of requests for this. I posted my sourdough bread recipe a few weeks ago, and so now it is time to step back and to make that starter so you can make not only that sourdough bread, but you can make so many different sourdough recipes. I'll link a bunch of those in the description below for you, so once you have this starter, you can just get started making all the delicious sourdough things you could want. So I'll be honest, when I was asked to make a sourdough starter, I was not super excited about it. I originally made mine probably 4 years ago, and let me just tell you, it was not easy. It took me about a month to get it to actually rise. I was so frustrated. I was scouring anything I could just to understand the why and what I was doing wrong. And at that time, there just wasn't a ton out there to really help me. But because I was so determined, it finally worked. I was able to start making bread and other sourdough goodies, and I have my starter. It is still alive. It is still doing super well, and I have fallen in love with sourdough. So today we're going to make that sourdough starter. We're going to make it from scratch, and I promise you, it will not take a month. It's a 5-day method, so we're gonna start with an empty jar, and then by day 5, you'll be able to start using your starter. So follow along with this. You will understand what your starter should do and not do, some tricks that will hopefully help you so it won't take you a month like it took me to get your starter going. And we're gonna have some fun. So on day 1, we're gonna start with that empty jar. Day 2, we're going to see the first stages of life come about. Day 3, we're gonna see some more activity. Sometimes day 3 just goes crazy. Then day 4 is like the beginning stages of it really being a sourdough starter. And then day 5, you'd be ready to bake. Before we get started, I wanna go over some of the tools that you will need just to have your starter, maintain your starter, which just is very simple. It really just includes a scale. You need a digital scale. I will link one in the description below, but it has to have grams, and you have to have a scale for sourdough. It makes it so much easier. You really understand exactly what you're putting in your bread because the amounts and the ratios really matter. The next thing that you're going to need is you're going to need some good water. I just like to use some spring water for this. You just need good water. Don't use distilled water. Most often you do not want to use your tap water because a lot of times it has the chlorine in it, and the chlorine will kill any of that bacteria that we're trying to grow in our starter. So our starter is just active bacteria from the environment brought into the flour and the water to make that yeast to naturally leaven our bread. So we have to have good water that's going to allow that to grow. So one of the mistakes that I made in the beginning when I was making my starter that lasted at least a month was that I was just using tap water. So at the time we were in Arizona, and I was just using the regular old tap water, not really thinking anything of it. And I truly believe that was the biggest deterrent for me on letting my starter grow. The next thing that you're going to need is you're going to need some good flour. So this is the flour that I like to use. I have actually made my original starter, my starter that I use most of the time, is actually made with bread flour. And you can certainly do this. For this video, I really wanted to do an all-purpose flour starter because all-purpose flour is a lot less expensive than bread flour. So the all-purpose flour that I buy, this is from Costco. I love Costco, obviously. You guys hear me say that a lot. But all-purpose flour, the biggest things to look for when you're looking for flour to buy it for anything sourdough, and honestly, I would say anything ever for anything that you bake. But in general, for sourdough, is you need an organic flour and you need it to be unbleached. Those two things are super important. The organic means that the wheat is not sprayed with any chemicals. The unbleached means it doesn't have any bleach in it, so it's not making it any whiter, which obviously will kill that bacteria as well. So chlorine, bleach are very bad for our starter. So we want some organic, unbleached flour. One thing I will tell you is when you are baking, if you are baking with bread flour, which you would do when you are making like a sourdough loaf, you can have your starter be an all-purpose starter and still use it in that bread loaf. So no big deal to cross do that, and then vice versa as well. You can also use like I use my bread flour starter for our biscuits, our sourdough biscuits that use all-purpose flour. So they can cross in the actual recipe, but you definitely want to keep consistency with what you start feeding your starter, you're going to continue feeding your starter. Now, one caveat, somebody might say, well, can I switch back and forth? And yes, you can. It just takes a little bit of time to train your starter to feed off of a different flour, but absolutely you can switch back and forth. You can convert a bread flour starter to an all-purpose starter and vice versa if you wanted to. But like I said, for this one, we're just gonna start with that all-purpose flour, and then we can continue on with that forever and ever and ever. You could pass this starter down to your kids one day if you wanted. The next thing that we need is we need a jar. So there are a couple options for jars. I like both of these options and I'll show you them. So the first option are these weck jars. I like to get the really big ones. You do not have to have like such a big jar if you do not want to, but I will tell you I've overflowed many a starter, and one, you're just wasting that starter that overflows on the counter and gets messy all over too, and no one wants to clean that up. Cleaning a starter jar, cleaning up your starter is just not very fun. So I like to have a bigger jar, and I also like to feed it a decent amount, so when I feed it, I can use it for multiple things and make sure I have enough all the time. So the weck jars are fantastic. They come, well, at least the ones that I have purchased, they come with this glass lid, and you need a lid of some sort to put over your starter, mainly so things don't get into your starter. The other option is going to just be a regular old jar. One caveat with that is make sure it's a wide mouth. If you have the skinny mouth jars, they will work, let me put it that way, but it's so much harder to stir it and then get the starter in and out and the flour. So I would say use a wide mouth jar. My system, so I don't get this mixed up, is I use these weck jars to feed my starter. It's the one that sits on my counter. It goes back and forth in the fridge when I'm going to use it. So that's what I feed my starter with. Then I use this wide mouth jar where I keep my discard in the fridge. Honestly, the reason I do that is so I don't get confused on which one is which. So that's really it. That's my simple way of knowing it. This one's my active one. This one's my discard one. The only difference between active starter and discard starter is that the active starter is one that is rising and has been fed and just been fed and is risen to the top. The discard starter is one that hasn't been fed and that we just let be a little bit more dormant. And there's one more important thing that you will need, and that is something to stir it with. There is a thing called a spurtle that you could buy. I will link one in the description below if you would like. Or I like to use what we call at our house a big spoon, which is just your bigger tablespoon. I'll show you as we go on in the video how exactly I use the tablespoon. I just think it's easier to use, and it's just frankly easier to clean. Now that we have all of our stuff, all of our ingredients, let's get started. So for day one, we are going to start with an empty jar. We're going to put that straight on our scale here. And you're going to want to zero out your scale. And then we are going to start with 60 grams of water and 60 grams of flour. Then you're going to just pour that 60 grams of water in. It is not crazy important that you hit exactly 60, but you really want to make sure that your water and your flour are as equal as possible. So on this one specifically, I hit 62. So, okay, just fine. And then you notice I spill on the counter because for the life of me, I love these measuring things, but I can never pour them super clean and not get it all over the counter. So if one of you has a trick for that, please let me know. So after you add the water, you're gonna wanna zero out your scale again. So, and remember how many grams that you actually got in there. So like I said, in this case, it's 62. So I'm gonna zero that out. And I just take my big spoon and we're going to add 62 grams, or as close to 62 as I can get in here. All right, I hit 63, fantastic, we'll take it. So then what I do is I'm gonna take my big spoon and then I just flip it over. I'm holding the actual spoon part, and then this bottom part, the handle, is what I'm gonna use to stir. So I just take my jar and then I'm just going to stir it together. It will get thicker, you will see that. You're gonna wanna scrape down those sides. Then you're gonna wanna scrape down that spoon. And that's it. We've fed our starter for day 1. So you're just going to put the lid on it, and then you're gonna set it on your counter for 24 hours. If your house is a little cooler like mine, so mine is currently at 66 degrees, if you want, you can set this so that the sun just shines on it and gets it a little bit warmer as well. It helps just to get that bacteria going, and we'll get that starter to start coming to life. So now we're going to move on to day 2. So I've been working hard this week. Every day I've been making a new starter and then feeding all of the other ones, so my counter was filled with new starters so I could show you each day by day of what it's going to look like. So the process is basically the same each day when we're feeding it, but I wanted to make sure that you got to see the difference. So this would be a starter that I fed yesterday. So this starter is on day 2. So here's our day 1 starter, here's our day 2, and we're going to feed this because it's time for it to be fed, just like you will at home. So we'll remove that lid. What we're going to do is we're going to roughly remove half of this starter. So I say roughly as it really can be roughly. Just about half is what you're going to remove. Now, this starter is not good starter to use. You can't even use it really in any discard recipes. So this will be one of the only times through day 3 that I will tell you you're going to discard this half of this starter straight into the trash. Normally, I will never tell you to throw away any discard starter because it can be used and you should use it. But this is just not ready to use yet. So we're going to discard half of this in the trash. Okay, so I roughly discarded half of this, and then I'm going to set that on my scale. I'm going to zero that out, and then we're going to add our water. So we're going to feed it that same ratio, the 60 grams of water, 60 grams of flour. All right, right at 60. Zero that out. One of the things that I like to do is once the water is in there, and I always add the water first, you're gonna just swirl around in your jar that water and that starter. You're trying to mix in that starter and the water together so that it gets all the way throughout the liquid, so that it will hopefully permeate that flour better and more evenly to start growing. So once it's a little bit more combined, then I set it on my scale again. We're gonna measure out 60 grams. Okay, and if you get a little bit over, no big deal. All right, once we have that measured out, we're gonna stir it up. We're gonna take the back of my spoon. I'm just gonna stir it up. You're gonna try and scrape down those sides. And there you go, that's it for day 2. We're gonna put our lid on, we're gonna let that set for 24 hours, and then we will feed it again for day 3. All right, it is time to feed our day 3 starter. So as you can see, this one is a little bit more bubbly. So we'll remove that lid, and you can see the bubbles that are really forming in there. It is starting to get a little bit stronger. There's more activity coming. When you smell it, it's a little bit sweet. So again, we will discard half of this, still going in the trash. So discard the half in the trash. Even though it seems like it might be ready, it's not quite ready to keep. Okay, so I discarded about half of that. Again, you don't have to be exact on how much you discard, but you do want to discard a decent amount. And part of the reason we discard in general is because if you didn't discard ever, if you didn't take some of it away, you would have this massive, massive jar of starter. And I don't think anyone needs all of that starter. This is sufficient to use and use and use. We discarded half. We'll put it on our scale. We're gonna zero that out. We'll add our 60 grams of water. Then we're going to swirl it around. Try to incorporate that starter and that water together. This is another reason why I like the larger jars, is because then it doesn't slosh all over. So once it's a little bit more incorporated there, then we're going to add our flour after we zero out our scale. So 60 grams of flour. Then we're going to stir that together. Scrape down those sides. And there you have it. Your day 3 starter is fed. We'll set that one aside. So we have day 1, day 2, and day 3. All right, I'm gonna switch up that jar on you for day 4. So this one is going to be day 4, and you can see that I use just a black hair tie or any hair tie to mark where it started. So after I fed it, so I marked where it started. You could use on these jars, the hair tie is probably a little bit too small to use to mark on these jars, but you could use like a dry erase marker or something to mark on these so you could see where it starts. And then what we're looking for, especially on the later days, is we're looking for it to double. So this is pretty much right at double. So we actually get to start keeping this discard, and we can use it for things like our sourdough biscuits or our berry galette crust, anything like that, which I'll link those below. We can use that discard starter for because it is actually doing well. So you can see in there, you can see some bubbles, and we're looking pretty good. It smells pretty good, and we are ready to keep this discard, and then we're going to feed this again to let it get bigger and bigger and bigger. To keep my discard, I'm just going to grab my jar, my discard jar, and I am going to take a spoon, and I'm going to get out half of my starter, approximately at least, and I'm going to put that in my discard jar so I can bake something super yummy with it. So that's about half there. The discard jar is just going to stay in the fridge. The discard will stay for a long time, like months and months if you don't use it. I honestly don't let mine stay that long because I bake with it quite often, but it will stay in there. If you don't use it for a little while, it will get what's called hooch on it, and it's just like a brown liquid that'll be kind of like covering the top. It's no big deal. You can either drain that off just in your sink, or you can stir it in. It'll just be extra sour at that point. So it's up to you on what you want to do. Most often I drain mine off because I don't like my sweet baked goods quite that sour, but you absolutely could just incorporate it in. There is a huge difference between the hooch that can go on there, which is kind of like a brownish liquidy color, and then mold. So black mold or pink mold. You do not want black or pink mold, or any mold for that matter, on your starter at all. If you do, you need to throw the whole thing away and start completely over. I will say, in the 4-ish plus years that I have been doing, maybe it's 5 now, 5 years that I have been doing sourdough, I have never had mold on anything, any of my starters, any of my discard. So it's not, I don't feel like it's super common, but if you do get it, definitely throw it away. Start over with a new starter. We discarded half. We're going to put it on our scale. We're going to zero that scale out. We need to add our water. We're still doing the 60 and the 60, so the 60 grams of water. We'll zero that out again. We'll mix that up. Swirl it around. Now we're gonna add our flour. And once we've hit that 60 grams, then we're going to stir that together. Another question I get asked is, do you need a new jar every day that you are doing a starter? No, you do not. You can use the same jar for as long as you would like. I typically change out my starter jar where I will just pour the starter in a new jar and then feed it probably once every 2 weeks, maybe a month. It just depends on how the jar is looking. Some people do it every time though, so it is completely up to you. Once we have that all stirred together, we're going to set that aside for another 24 hours on our counter and let that rise. All right, and now it's time for day 5. So as you can see from my marker here, where I marked it where it was fed, and then how high it is, this one is good to go. Okay, so we could bake bread with this. You could just use it for any discard recipes, whatever you wanted, but this starter is looking super good. So the biggest thing you want to make sure of is that you have the bubbles in there and that it is at least doubled in size. Those are gonna be the sure tell signs that you are good to go with your starter, that your starter's happy and it is ready to bake with. I don't know if you can see this on video as well, but this starter, so I fed it 24 hours ago, just like we did with these other days. You can kind of see, so right here, is where how high it did get, and now it's starting to fall again. So a lot of the recipes that we'll use for bread, you want to use this, what we call when it's at its peak. So when it's at the height part right before it starts to fall. So this one would be like slightly late on using it for bread, but absolutely just fine to use it for bread. Especially with the recipe that I have, it is not super picky. But the ideal is that when it's at its peak and then it starts to fall, it means it's gonna get hungry again and it really does want to be fed. So that's where this one's at. It's looking super good. We're definitely keeping this discard. So we're gonna discard half of this, or actually discard more than half of this. Usually I like to keep around a tablespoon in my jar before I feed it again. So we'll take our spoon, we'll discard all but about a tablespoon. And then look at all this discard starter we have. We could mix up anything. We could mix up the biscuits, the galette. The sky's the limit. We could just do any of our fun sourdough discard recipes. Okay, and then I want to show you what's left in my jar. When I say about a tablespoon, I truly mean about a tablespoon, but you don't have to leave a ton of starter in your jar before you feed it. It doesn't need a lot, especially when your starter's healthy. You do not need to leave a bunch of starter in there to continue feeding it each day. So we'll put that on our scale. We'll zero it out, and we're gonna feed it that 60 grams of water and that 60 grams of flour. You could feed it at a higher rate if you would like. So typically when I am feeding my current starter, when I'm going to make something, I am feeding it at about 130 grams of water and 130 grams of flour. That reason is because I want more starter. I need more for like a bread recipe. I need more just to have extra for discard so I can make multiple things if I wanted to. So it is important to know what you need to make and how much you need as to how much you feed it. Your starter's the happiest when you feed it that 1-to-1. So whatever water amount you're going to feed, you want to feed it that same amount in flour. This is why the grams are important, is because water and flour weigh different amounts, so then it makes it perfect for when you feed it because then they're actually equal, versus if you measure it in the cups, it's going to be different because obviously water and flour weigh different amounts and the volume are just different. So let's feed that. I am just today gonna do the 60 grams of water and the 60 grams of flour. We're going to swirl that around, try and incorporate that starter and that water together. Zero it out again. We'll add our flour. Then we're gonna stir that. Scrape down those sides. And there you go. Our day 5 starter. So I hope all of this shows you can actually make a starter in 5 days. You can start using it. If you wanted to on day 5, if you're nice and bubbly and doubling, you could use it for your sourdough bread recipe. Once your starter is good, it is solid, it's healthy, and it's strong, then you only need to feed your starter about once a week to really keep it going. Sometimes I will only have one recipe that I want to do that week that's sourdough. So I'll pull out my starter a couple days before that. I'll feed it, I'll discard it, feed it again, and then use it to bake with, even if it's just a discard recipe. And then I'll put it back in the fridge for another week. So it doesn't have to be fed daily. It is not something that you're gonna be like, oh my gosh, I can't handle this. No, it does not have to be fed daily. You can put it in and out of the fridge whenever you want to bake with it. I do recommend that you pull it out and feed it a few days before, especially if you're gonna make something like bread. So it's really just nice and healthy and strong to raise that sourdough bread. But I hope you guys like this recipe. I hope that you make your own sourdough starters. Please let me know in the comments if you have any issues or problems that I could possibly help with. Trust me, as I said earlier, I have been through it. I understand your pain if there is any, but I really do hope that this made it easy for you. You have the right ingredients, the right things that you need so that you can make your own sourdough starter. It is that simple. So thank you guys again for watching. If you want more recipes from scratch meals, make sure you subscribe, hit that bell, give this video a thumbs up. I don't want you to miss any recipes that I post weekly. This recipe is on my website at my-colorado-kitchen.com. It's printable there. You can see that and many others. I wish you all the best on your sourdough journey, and from my kitchen to yours, happy cooking!